Prophecy Decodex. Decode the past, reveal the future.
What if I told you that events unfolding in the Middle East today were predicted over 2,000 years ago in ancient Hebrew texts? What if the tensions between Iran and Israel, the archaeological discoveries, reshaping our understanding of biblical history, and the then evidence connecting modern populations to ancient peoples were all part of a prophetic tapestry woven by the hands of time itself? Today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating and controversial topics in biblical scholarship, the Hebrew Israelite movement, ancient prophecies that seem to echo in today's headlines, and archaeological discoveries that are rewriting history books. We're going to explore how ancient texts like the Book of Daniel, the visions of Ezekiel, and the prophecies of Isaiah may be speaking directly to our modern. But before we begin this journey through time, prophecy, and archaeological evidence, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't about division or superiority of one people over another. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God of all nations, all peoples, all. As the prophet Malachi declared in chapter 2 verse 10, have we not all one? Hath not one God created us? Let's start with a question that has sparked passionate debate in communities across America and beyond. Who exactly are the Hebrew Israelites? This isn't just an academic question. It's a deeply personal journey of identity, faith, and historical connection that has captured the hearts and minds of millions. The term Hebrew Israelites refers to various groups, particularly within African American communities, who believe they are the direct descendants of the ancient Israelites described in the Hebrew Bible. This isn't simply a religious belief, it's a comprehensive worldview that connects spiritual identity with historical heritage, creating a powerful narrative of divine purpose and ancestral pride. Now, before we go any further, let's examine what the archaeological record actually tells us. The Merneptah Stele, a massive granite monument discovered in Egypt and dating to 1208 BC, contains the earliest known reference to Israel outside of the. This isn't some obscure academic footnote. This is hard evidence carved in stone by the ancient Egyptians themselves. The hieroglyphic text reads, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is not," referring to a military campaign against a people called Israel in the land of Canaan. What makes this discovery so significant is that it confirms the existence of a distinct people group called Israel in the ancient Near East over 3,000. This wasn't just a religious concept or a mythological story. These were real people with a real presence in the historical record. Recent studies have added another layer of complexity to this discussion. In 2023, researchers published findings from excavations at Kiryat Yearim, an ancient site in Israel, revealing genetic connections between ancient Canaanite populations and modern communities around the world, including some African populations. These aren't definitive proof of ancestry, but they do suggest that the genetic landscape of the ancient Near East was far more diverse and interconnected than many people previously believed. For many in the Hebrew Israelite community, particularly in African American churches and cultural organizations, these discoveries represent validation of claims they've held for generations. The Church of the Living God, founded in the late 19th century, has long taught that African Americans are the descendants of the biblical Israelites, and they see these archaeological and genetic findings as confirmation of their beliefs. But here's where the conversation gets really interesting. The Hebrew Bible itself speaks of a great scattering of the Israelite people. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 64 through 68, Moses prophesies that the children of Israel would be scattered among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other. Could it be that this scattering was more extensive and far-reaching than traditional scholarship has acknowledged? The controversy surrounding Hebrew Israelite identity claims has sparked intense academic debate. Some scholars dismiss these claims as historically unfounded, pointing to the lack of direct genealogical evidence linking modern African American populations to ancient Israel. Others argue that the dismissal of these claims reflects a broader bias in biblical scholarship that has traditionally been dominated by European perspective. What's fascinating is how archaeological discoveries continue to challenge our assumptions about ancient Israel. The excavation of four-room houses, a distinctive architectural style found only in ancient Israelite settlements, has revealed the complexity of Israelite. These structures, dating from the 12th to 8th centuries BC, show a people with sophisticated building techniques and distinct cultural practices that set them apart from their neighbors. Recent excavations at Tel El Dabai have uncovered evidence of these four-room houses in contexts that suggest a more diverse ancient Israelite population than previously thought. The archaeological evidence doesn't tell us everything, but it does suggest that ancient Israel was a multicultural society with connections to various populations throughout the ancient world. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered beginning in 1947 in caves near Qumran have provided unprecedented insight into the Hebrew Bible and ancient Jewish thought. These scrolls, dating from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century CE, include some of the earliest known copies of biblical texts, confirming the remarkable preservation of Hebrew scripture across millennia. What's particularly relevant to our discussion is how these scrolls reveal the diversity of Jewish thought and practice in the ancient world. The Qumran community that preserved these texts had their own understanding of Israelite identity and their place in God's prophetic plan. They saw themselves as the true Israel, the remnant chosen by God for the end. As we examine the biblical promises to Israel, we find themes that resonate across cultures and communities. The promise in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14 speaks of a people who would be strangers in a land not their own, enslaved and afflicted for 400 years, but then brought out with great substance. For many in the Hebrew Israeli community, this prophecy mirrors the African-American experience of slavery and liberation. The prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 31 verse 31, speaks of a new covenant that God would make with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. This isn't just ancient history, it's a promise that continues to inspire hope and identity among communities who see themselves as part of God's unfolding. What emerges from this exploration is not a simple answer to questions of identity and ancestry, but rather a rich tapestry of faith, history, and human. Whether one accepts or rejects specific claims about Hebrew Israelite identity, the deeper questions remain. How do we understand our place in God's plan? How do we connect with the ancient stories that have shaped human civilization? How do we honor both historical truth and the spiritual needs of communities seeking meaning and identity? Now we're going to dive into some of the most mysterious and compelling prophecies in the Hebrew Bible, prophecies that many believe are playing out in our world today. We're talking about visions that were recorded over 2 millennia ago but seem to describe events that could be ripped from tomorrow's headlines. Let's start with the book of Daniel, one of the most controversial and fascinating books in the Hebrew Bible. Daniel chapter 7 describes a vision of 4 great beasts rising from the sea, representing 4 successive world empires. Traditional interpretation identifies these as Babylon, Persia, Greece. But here's where it gets interesting for our modern world. The second beast, described as being like a bear raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth, is widely interpreted as representing the Persian. Daniel chapter 8 specifically names the ram with 2 horns as the kings of Median. Now, what makes this relevant to our discussion today is that modern Iran is the direct geographical and cultural successor to ancient Persia. Archaeological evidence from cuneiform tablets discovered in Babylon confirms the historical accuracy of Daniel's timeline. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay artifact dating to 539 BC, documents the Persian King Cyrus's policy of allowing exiled peoples, including the Israelites, to return to their homelands. This isn't speculation, this is historical fact carved in clay by the Persians. But Daniel's prophecies don't stop with ancient history. In chapter 11, the text describes what many scholars believe are future conflicts involving the king of the south and the king of the north, with detailed descriptions of military campaigns, political alliances, and religious persecution that some interpret as referring to end times events. The prophet Ezekiel provides even more specific details about a conflict involving Gog of the land of Magog. In chapters 38 and 39, Ezekiel describes a great northern power that will come against the land of Israel in the latter years. The text specifically mentions Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya as part of this coalition. Now, here's where modern geopolitics gets really interesting. Many biblical scholars and prophecy researchers have noted that Meshech and Tubal correspond to regions in modern-day Turkey and Russia, while Persia clearly refers to modern Iran. The description of this coalition matches remarkably well with current Middle Eastern alliances and conflicts. Archaeological evidence from Assyrian records found at Nineveh confirms the existence of these ancient peoples and their geographical locations. The Taylor Prism, dating to approximately 700 BC, mentions several of these same nations in the context of Assyrian military campaigns, providing historical verification for Ezekiel's geographical knowledge. What makes Ezekiel's prophecy particularly compelling is its description of Israel as a land of unwalled villages, people dwelling safely without bars. This description seemed impossible for most of Jewish history, when Israel was either in exile or under constant threat. But today, many parts of Israel do indeed consist of unwalled villages and agricultural settlements, just as Ezekiel described. The prophet Isaiah adds another layer to our understanding of prophetic connections to modern Iran. In chapters 13 through 23, Isaiah pronounces judgments against various nations, including specific oracles against Babylon and the Medes, which were the two primary components of the Persian Empire. Isaiah chapter 21 describes the fall of Babylon to the Medes and Persians, and event occurred in 539 BC exactly as prophesied. But Isaiah also speaks of future events involving these same regions. Chapter 13 speaks of the day of the Lord coming upon Babylon, with imagery that many interpret as referring to end times events. Recent artificial intelligence analysis of Hebrew Bible authorship published in 2025 has revealed the sophisticated literary structure of these prophetic. The AI analysis suggests multiple layers of composition, indicating that these prophecies were carefully crafted documents that demonstrate remarkable historical and geographical knowledge. What's particularly fascinating is how these ancient prophecies seem to anticipate modern geopolitical realities. Iran's current role as a regional power, its support for proxy forces throughout the Middle East, and its opposition to Israel all seem to align with the prophetic picture painted in these ancient texts. The role of prophecy in shaping cultural identity cannot be understated. For Hebrew Israelite communities, these prophecies provide a framework for understanding both their historical experience and their future destiny. Isaiah chapter 61 verses 1 and 2 speaks of being anointed to preach good tidings to the meek, to bind up the brokenhearted, and to proclaim liberty to the captives. These words have resonated powerfully with African American communities throughout their history. Archaeological discoveries continue to validate the historical context of these. The Mount Ebal curse tablet discovered in 2019 contains what may be the earliest known inscription of the divine name U, dating to approximately 1200. This tiny lead tablet, measuring only 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters, was found at the exact location described in Deuteronomy as the place where Joshua was to build an altar and pronounce curses. The authentication of this tablet has sparked intense scholarly debate, but if it would push back the earliest known use of the divine name by several centuries and provide physical evidence for the biblical account of early Israelite religious practices. As we examine these prophetic texts and their potential modern applications, we're forced to grapple with profound questions about the nature of prophecy. Are these ancient visions descriptive or prescriptive? Do they predict specific future events, or do they provide archetypal patterns that repeat throughout history? What's clear is that these prophecies have retained their power to inspire, challenge, and intrigue people across cultures and centuries. Whether one approaches them from a position of faith or skepticism, their influence on human history and contemporary geopolitics cannot be denied. The spade doesn't lie, as archaeologists like to say, and recent discoveries are revolutionizing our understanding of ancient Israel and its connections to the modern world. We're not just talking about dusty artifacts in museum cases, we're talking about evidence that's rewriting textbooks and challenging assumptions that have stood for generations. Let's go back to the Merneptah stele, because this monument is absolutely crucial to our understanding of ancient Israel. This isn't just the earliest mention of Israel outside the Bible, it's a window into the complex political landscape of the ancient Near East. The stele describes Pharaoh Merneptah's military campaigns in Canaan around 1208 BC, and the reference to Israel uses a hieroglyphic determinative that indicates a people group, not a geographical location. What this tells us is that by the 13th century BC, Israel was recognized as a distinct ethnic and cultural entity in the ancient world. This wasn't a small tribal group. This was a people significant enough to merit mention in Egyptian royal propaganda. The archaeological context of the stele, found at Merneptah's mortuary temple in Thebes, demonstrates the importance the Egyptians placed on their victory over various Canaanite peoples, including Israel. Recent analysis of ancient Canaanite remains has provided fascinating insights into the genetic landscape of the ancient Near East. Studies published in 2023 analyzed genetic material from burials at multiple sites in ancient Canaan, revealing a complex pattern of population movement and genetic admixture that challenges simple narratives about ancient peoples. The genetic evidence shows that ancient Canaanite populations, including the Israelites, were more genetically diverse than previously assumed. There are genetic markers that connect ancient Canaanite populations to modern Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, and yes, some African populations. This doesn't prove specific ancestry claims, but it does suggest that the ancient Near East was a much more cosmopolitan and interconnected region than many scholars previously believed. The Mount Ebal discovery represents one of the most significant recent archaeological finds related to early Israel. The lead tablet, inscribed with what appears to be the earliest known use of the divine name Yo, was found in precisely the location described in Deuteronomy, chapter 27, as the place where Joshua was commanded to build an altar and proclaim curses upon those who disobeyed God's law. The text on the tablet is extremely difficult to read due to its small size and the deterioration of the lead, but advanced imaging techniques have revealed what appears to be a Hebrew inscription, invoking curses exactly as described in the biblical account. The dating of the tablet to approximately 1200 BS places it at the very beginning of the Iron Age, the period when most scholars believe the Israelites were establishing themselves in Canaan. Critics of the discovery point out that the reading of the inscription is of disputed and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. However, the archaeological context of the find, including the presence of an altar structure that matches biblical descriptions, lends credibility to the discovery's significance. The four-room house architectural style provides another fascinating window into ancient Israeli culture. These distinctive structures, found throughout ancient Israel but virtually nowhere else in the ancient Near East, represent a unique cultural marker that archaeologists use to identify Israelite. Excavations at sites like Khirbet Kiafa, Tel Es-Safi, and numerous other locations have revealed hundreds of these four-room houses dating from the Iron. What's particularly interesting is the sudden appearance of this architectural style in the archaeological record around 1200 BC, corresponding to the biblical timeline for Israelite settlement in Canaan. The houses themselves were well designed for extended families, with ground floor areas for animals and storage, and upper floors for living space. The standardization of this design across ancient Israel suggests a shared cultural identity and possibly centralized planning or cultural transmission. Recent excavations have also revealed evidence of dietary practices that align with biblical descriptions of Israelite religious law. Archaeological analysis of animal bones from Israelite sites shows a notable absence of pig remains consistent with the dietary restrictions described in. This might seem like a small detail, but it represents powerful evidence for cultural continuity between the biblical texts and archaeological reality. The Dead Sea Scrolls continue to provide insights into ancient Jewish thought and the transmission of biblical texts. Recent analysis using advanced imaging techniques has revealed previously unreadable portions of the scrolls, including fragments that may contain earlier versions of biblical texts. What's particularly relevant to our discussion is the diversity of Jewish thought represented in the scrolls. The Qumran community that preserved these texts had their own understanding of Israelite identity and their role in God's prophetic plan. They saw themselves as the true remnant of Israel, chosen by God for the end. The scrolls include copies of biblical books like Isaiah and Daniel that are remarkably consistent with later manuscripts, demonstrating the careful preservation of these prophetic texts across. This consistency is particularly significant given the central role these prophecies play in Hebrew Israelite theology. Advanced gene analysis techniques are revealing new insights about ancient populations with each passing year. Recent studies of ancient Dana from First Temple period burials in Jerusalem have shown genetic connections to modern Jewish populations, but also revealed more genetic diversity than previously expected. The analysis of ancient Nai is technically challenging and requires extremely careful interpretation, but the results are providing unprecedented insights into ancient population movements and genetic relationships. For Hebrew Israelite communities, these studies offer the possibility of scientific validation for ancestry claims, though the interpretation of genetic data in terms of cultural identity remains complex and controversial. The Cyrus cylinder deserves special attention in our discussion because it directly relates to biblical prophecies about Persia's role in Israelite history. This clay cylinder, discovered in Babylon and dating to 539 BC, contains Cyrus's own account of his policies regarding conquered peoples. The cylinder describes Cyrus's policy of allowing exiled peoples to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples, a policy that directly enabled the return of Jewish exiles to Jerusalem as described in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. This isn't just biblical history, this is confirmed by the Persian records. The archaeological evidence from Persian period Judah supports the biblical account of return and rebuilding. Excavations at Jerusalem and other sites have revealed evidence of renewed construction and population growth during the Persian period, consistent with the return of exiles described in the biblical texts. What makes all of this archaeological evidence so compelling is how it provides an independent verification of many biblical claims. The archaeology doesn't prove every detail of the biblical account, but it does confirm the basic historical framework and cultural context described in the Hebrew Bible. This archaeological evidence has particular significance for Hebrew Israelite communities because it provides tangible, scientific support for the historical reality of ancient Israel. These aren't just stories or myths, these are accounts of real people who lived in real places and left real archaeological traces. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond academic circles. They speak to fundamental questions about identity, heritage, and connection to the past that resonate with communities around the world who are seeking to understand their place in history and their relationship to the ancient biblical narrative. The revolution in genetic science is rewriting our understanding of human history, and nowhere is this more evident than in studies of ancient populations from the biblical world. We're not just talking about theoretical discussions anymore, we're talking about hard genetic data that's revealing connections and patterns that previous generations could never have imagined. The most comprehensive recent study of ancient Canaanite Duna comes from the Kiryat Yearim excavations, where researchers analyze genetic material from burials dating to various periods of ancient history. The results, published in 2023, revealed a complex genetic landscape that challenges many assumptions about ancient populations. The study found that ancient Canaanite populations, which would have included the various peoples mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, showed significant genetic. There were genetic markers that connect these ancient populations to modern Middle Eastern populations, as expected, but also connections to Mediterranean, North African, and even some sub-Saharan African genetic lineages. Now, This doesn't prove specific ancestry claims made by any modern community, but it does demonstrate that the ancient Near East was far more genetically diverse than many people assumed. The idea that ancient biblical populations were genetically homogeneous simply doesn't match the archaeological evidence. The Beta Israel of Ethiopia provide a fascinating case study in the complexity of Jewish identity and genetic ancestry. These Ethiopian Jews have maintained Jewish religious practices for centuries, and they claim descent from either the biblical tribe of Dan or from Jewish communities established during the time of King Solomon. Genetic studies of the Beta Israel have revealed a complex ancestry that includes both East African and Middle Eastern genetic markers. While the specific percentages and interpretations are debated among geneticists, the presence of Middle Eastern genetic markers in this population is consistent with at least some ancient connection to the Levantine region. The Israeli government's recognition of the Beta Israel as Jews and their airlifting to Israel during Operations Moses and Solomon in the 1980s represents one of the most dramatic examples of how genetic and cultural identity intersect in the modern world. Archaeological evidence from ancient Ethiopia supports the existence of Jewish communities in the region for many centuries. Inscriptions from the ancient kingdom of Aksum include references to Jewish practices and beliefs, suggesting that Jewish communities were established in Ethiopia much earlier than many historians previously believed. The genetic studies of Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewish populations provide another layer of complexity to our understanding of Jewish diaspora genetics. Multiple studies have consistently shown that these populations retain significant Middle Eastern genetic markers despite centuries of diaspora and intermarriage. The Ashkenazi Jewish population, despite living in Europe for over a millennium, shows clear genetic connections to ancient Middle Eastern populations. Similarly, Sephardic Jewish populations, who lived primarily in Spain and North Africa, retain genetic markers that connect them to the ancient Levant. What's particularly interesting is that these genetic studies show that Jewish populations from different parts of the world are more closely related to each other than they are to their non-Jewish neighbors, suggesting a common ancestry despite geographic separation. However, the genetics of Jewish populations also show clear evidence of admixture with local populations wherever Jews settled. This is exactly what we would expect from a diaspora population, and it demonstrates the complex relationship between genetic ancestry and cultural. Recent advances in ancient data technology are allowing researchers to analyze genetic material from archaeological sites throughout the ancient Near East. Studies of DNA from First Temple period burials in Jerusalem have revealed genetic diversity within ancient Jewish populations, supporting the idea that ancient Israel was more genetically diverse than simple narratives suggest. The analysis of ancient dye is technically extremely challenging and requires sophisticated laboratory techniques to avoid contamination and achieve reliable. However, the results that have been published are providing unprecedented insights into ancient population genetics. For Hebrew Israelite communities, these genetic studies offer both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, the evidence for genetic diversity in ancient biblical populations supports arguments that these communities were not ethnically homogeneous. On the other hand, establishing specific genetic connections between modern populations and ancient biblical peoples remains extremely difficult given the limitations of current genetic technology and the complexity of human population history. The interpretation of genetic data in terms of cultural and religious identity remains a contentious issue in both academic and religious circles. Genetics can tell us about biological ancestry, but the relationship between genetic ancestry and cultural or religious identity is complex and not easily reduced to simple percentages. What's clear from all these genetic studies is that human populations have been mixing and moving throughout history in ways that challenge simple narratives about ethnic purity or isolated population. The ancient Near East, as the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, was particularly characterized by population movement and genetic mixing. The biblical narrative itself supports this understanding of population diversity. The Hebrew Bible describes the Israelites as a mixed multitude that left Egypt, and it records numerous instances of intermarriage with other peoples. The genetic evidence is consistent with this biblical description of a diverse. Recent studies using advanced statistical techniques to analyze genetic data are revealing population movements and connections that weren't apparent in earlier. These techniques, combined with an ever-growing database of ancient and modern genetic information, are likely to provide even more insights in the coming. The implications of genetic research for understanding biblical history and modern identity claims are still being debated and will likely continue to evolve as technology advances and more data becomes available. What's certain is that the simple genetic narratives of the past are giving way to a much more complex and nuanced understanding of human population history. The prophetic dimensions of genetic discoveries add another layer of significance for religious communities. The gathering of genetic information from populations around the world and the revelation of previously unknown connections between distant peoples could be seen as fulfilling biblical prophecies about the restoration and reunification of scattered peoples. Ezekiel chapter 37 describes a vision of dry bones coming together and being restored to life, which many interpret as a prophecy about the restoration of Israel from exile and dispersion. The modern ability to trace genetic connections between populations separated by continents and centuries could be seen as a technological fulfillment of this ancient prophetic vision. We've reached the point where ancient prophecy meets modern headlines, where 2,500-year-old visions seem to be playing out on our television screens and computer monitors. The connections between biblical prophecy and current events in the Middle East are so striking that they demand serious examination, regardless of one's religious beliefs. Let's start with the undeniable historical fact that ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, plays a central role in biblical prophecy and Jewish history. The Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC, immediately implemented a policy that allowed exiled Jewish communities to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This isn't just biblical history, this is confirmed by Persian records including the famous Cyrus cylinder. Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28 and chapter 45, verse 1 specifically name Cyrus as God's anointed one, his Messiah, chosen to accomplish God's purposes. The Hebrew Bible presents Cyrus as a foreign ruler chosen by God to restore his. But the biblical prophecies about Persia don't end with Cyrus. Daniel chapter 8 provides a detailed prophecy about a ram with two horns, representing the kings of Media and Persia, and verse 20 specifically identifies this ram as the Medo-Persian Empire. The prophecy describes this empire becoming great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land, which corresponds exactly to the historical expansion of the Persian Empire. Archaeological evidence from Persian period sites throughout the former Persian Empire confirms the historical accuracy of these biblical descriptions. Excavations at Persepolis, Susa, and other Persian sites have revealed the administrative complexity and territorial extent of the empire that matches the biblical accounts. Now here's where modern geopolitics enters the picture. Iran today occupies the same geographical territory as ancient Persia, and Iranian leaders explicitly connect their nation to the ancient Persian heritage. Iranian government officials regularly reference Persian history and see themselves as the inheritors of Persian greatness. The prophet Ezekiel provides even more specific details about Persia's role in end times events. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 describe a great coalition led by Gog of the land of Magog that will attack Israel in the latter years. Verse 5 of chapter 38 specifically lists Persia as part of this. What makes this prophecy particularly relevant to current events is the geographical and political accuracy of Ezekiel's description. The coalition includes Meshech and Tubal, which correspond to regions in modern Turkey and Russia, along with Persia, which is obviously Iran. Current Middle Eastern alliances and proxy relationships bear a striking resemblance to this ancient prophetic description. Iran's current role as a regional power opposing Israel and supporting proxy forces throughout the Middle East seems to align remarkably well with the biblical portrayal of Persia as an end-times adversary of Israel. Iran's support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and various militias in Syria and Iraq creates a network of opposition to Israel that spans the region. The timing elements in Ezekiel's prophecy are particularly intriguing. The text describes this attack as occurring when Israel is dwelling safely in unwalled villages, when they have been gathered out of many peoples and brought back from the sword. This description matches the modern state of Israel more closely than any period in Jewish history since the ancient kingdom. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Israel confirms the historical pattern of destruction and restoration that characterizes Jewish history in the multiple layers of destruction followed by rebuilding at sites like Jerusalem. Lachish and Hazor demonstrate the cyclical nature of Jewish presence in the land that continues to this day. The book of Daniel provides additional prophetic details that seem to connect to modern. Daniel chapter 11 describes detailed conflicts between the king of the south and the king of the north, with many scholars interpreting these as references to ongoing Middle Eastern conflicts involving Iran and its proxies. Recent artificial intelligence analysis of biblical texts has revealed sophisticated literary patterns in these prophecies that suggest careful composition and detailed knowledge of geopolitical. The AI analysis indicates that these texts demonstrate remarkable consistency in their geographical and political descriptions. For Hebrew Israelite communities, these prophetic connections to Iran and modern geopolitics have particular significance. Many see themselves as playing a central role in end-times events, with their restoration and recognition as part of God's plan for the latter days. The Church of the Living God and other Hebrew Israelite organizations have developed detailed interpretations of biblical prophecy that place their communities at the center of God's end-times plan. They see current events in the Middle East, including Aaron's role, as confirmation of their prophetic understanding. Archaeological discoveries continue to provide context for understanding these prophetic texts. The Tel Dan inscription, dating to the 9th century BC, provides the earliest a known reference to the House of David outside the Bible, confirming the historical reality of the Davidic dynasty that plays a central role in biblical prophecy. Recent excavations at sites throughout Israel have revealed evidence of the complex political and military relationships that characterize the ancient Near. These discoveries provide historical context for understanding the prophetic texts that describe regional conflicts and international alliances. The role of faith in interpreting geopolitical events cannot be understated. For millions of people around the world, current events in the Middle East are not just political developments, they're prophetic fulfillments that demonstrate God's active involvement in human history. This prophetic perspective on current events influences how people understand and respond to international developments. The conflict between Iran and Israel is seen not just as a regional dispute, but as part of a cosmic struggle between good and evil that was prophesied thousands of years ago. The implications of this prophetic worldview extend far beyond religious communities. When millions of people interpret current events through the lens of biblical prophecy, it affects public opinion, political support, and international relations in ways that secular analysts often fail to appreciate. Archaeological evidence from ancient Persian sites provides additional context for understanding Iran's historical role. Excavations at Persepolis have revealed the administrative records of the Persian Empire, including references to Jewish communities and their status within the empire. The complex relationship between ancient Persia and the Jewish people, involving both liberation and oppression, provides historical precedent for understanding modern Iran's complicated relationship with Jewish communities and the State of Israel. Recent studies have revealed genetic connections between modern Iranian populations and ancient Persian peoples, confirming the historical continuity between ancient and modern Iran. These genetic studies also show connections between ancient Persian populations and other ancient Near Eastern peoples, including those from the Levant As we examine these connections between ancient prophecy and modern geopolitics, we're confronted with profound questions about the nature of history, prophecy, and divine providence. Whether one approaches these questions from a position of faith or skepticism, the correlations between ancient texts and modern events are undeniably striking. The accuracy of biblical prophecies regarding ancient Persia's role in Jewish history provides a foundation for considering whether these same texts might have relevance for understanding modern Iran's role in contemporary Middle Eastern conflicts. What's clear is that these ancient prophecies continue to influence how millions of people understand current events, and this influence has real-world implications for international relations, public policy, and regional stability in the Middle East. The connection between biblical prophecy and modern geopolitics reminds us that ancient texts continue to shape contemporary worldviews in ways that purely secular analysis often fails to appreciate. Understanding these connections is essential for anyone seeking to understand the complex dynamics of modern Middle Eastern politics. As we reach the end of our journey through ancient prophecies, archaeological discoveries, and modern connections, we're left with more questions than answers, and that's exactly as it should be. The intersection of faith, history, and science doesn't provide simple solutions. It provides rich opportunities for exploration, reflection, and we've seen how the Merneptah still confirms the ancient presence of Israel in Canaan, how Downa studies reveal the genetic complexity of ancient populations, and how archaeological discoveries continue to validate aspects of biblical history. We've explored how ancient prophecies about Persia seem to echo in modern Iran's geopolitical role, and how these connections inspire and challenge people of faith around the world. For Hebrew Israelite communities, particularly within African American culture, these discoveries and connections provide powerful affirmation of identity and the archaeological evidence for ancient Israel's diversity, the genetic studies showing connections between ancient and modern populations, and the prophetic texts describing restoration and recognition all contribute to a narrative of divine purpose and historical continuity. For all viewers, regardless of background or belief, these explorations invite us to consider the enduring power of ancient texts, the complexity of human history, and the ongoing relevance of questions about identity, purpose, and divine providence. The prophet Malachi reminds us in chapter 2 verse 10 that we all have one Father, that one God created us all. This truth transcends genetic studies, archaeological discoveries, and prophetic interpretation. We are united not by data percentages or historical claims, but by our shared humanity and our common search for meaning and purpose. The archaeological evidence we've examined demonstrates that ancient Israel was a diverse, complex society with connections to peoples throughout the ancient. The genetic studies reveal that human populations have been mixing and moving throughout history in ways that challenge simple narratives about ethnic purity or isolated peoples. The prophetic texts we've explored speak to universal themes of justice, restoration, and divine purpose that resonate across cultural and ethnic. These aren't just ancient Jewish texts, they're human documents that address fundamental questions about suffering, hope, and ultimate meaning. As we look at modern Iran's role in Middle Eastern geopolitics through the lens of ancient prophecy, we're reminded that history often moves in patterns that seem to echo across centuries. Whether these patterns represent divine providence, historical cycles, or human psychology, they invite us to consider our own role in the unfolding drama of human history. The Hebrew Israelite movement, with its emphasis on reclaimed identity and prophetic purpose, speaks to universal human needs for belonging, significance, and connection to something greater than. These needs transcend racial, ethnic, and cultural boundaries and unite us in our common humanity. The scientific advances in archaeology and genetics provide us with tools for understanding the past that previous generations could never have imagined. But these tools also remind us of the limitations of human knowledge and the mysteries that remain beyond our current understanding. As we face the future, whether as individuals, communities, or nations, we are called to remember that our strength lies not in division but in unity, not in exclusive claims but in shared truth, not in competition but in cooperation. The ancient Hebrew concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, reminds us that our ultimate purpose transcends personal identity and ethnic heritage. We are called to work together to heal the brokenness in our world, to seek justice for the oppressed, and to build bridges of understanding across the chasms that divide us. The prophetic vision of Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4 speaks of a time when nations will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, when nation will not lift up sword against nation and they will not learn war anymore. This vision isn't limited to any single people or nation. It's a vision for all. As we've seen throughout our exploration, the archaeological evidence, genetic studies, and prophetic texts all point to the interconnectedness of human. We are not separate peoples with separate destinies. We are one human family with a shared origin and a common calling. The debates over Hebrew Israelite identity, the interpretation of ancient prophecies, and the connections between biblical texts and modern events will undoubtedly continue. These discussions are valuable not because they provide definitive answers, but because they encourage us to wrestle with fundamental questions about who we are and where we're going. What prophecies do you see unfolding in our world today? How do you understand your own identity in relationship to these ancient? What role do you believe you're called to play in the ongoing story of human? The answers to these questions won't be found in any single video, book, or academic study. They will be discovered through ongoing exploration, honest dialogue, and faithful living. They will emerge as we continue to dig deeper into archaeological sites, analyze genetic data, and wrestle with the meaning of ancient texts. But most importantly, they will be revealed as we learn to see each other not as competitors for divine favor or historical legitimacy, but as partners in the great work of tikkun olam, repairing the world and building the kingdom of heaven on earth. The story we've explored today isn't just about Hebrew Israelites or ancient prophecies or modern on. It's about the human quest for meaning, identity, and purpose that unites us. It's about our shared responsibility to seek truth, pursue justice, and work for peace in a world that desperately needs healing. As the prophet Micah declared in chapter 6, verse 8, "What does the Lord require of us? To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God." This calling transcends all ethnic, cultural, and religious boundaries. It is the calling of every human being who seeks to live a life of meaning, and the archaeological discoveries will continue, the genetic studies will advance, and the prophetic interpretations will evolve, but the fundamental call to justice, mercy, and humility remains constant across all cultures and all generations. So as we conclude our exploration today, let us commit ourselves not to winning debates or proving points, but to building bridges of understanding, seeking truth with humility, and working together for the healing of our broken world. Tell us in the comments what connections you've discovered between ancient prophecies and modern events. Share this video with others who are wrestling with questions of identity and most importantly, continue your own journey of exploration always, remembering that we are stronger together than we are apart. The ancient Hebrew blessing found in Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26 speaks to this unity. "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." This blessing isn't reserved for any single people or nation, it's God's desire for all humanity. As we face an uncertain future with tensions rising in the Middle East and around the world, let us hold fast to this vision of universal blessing and let us work together to understand our past, engage our present, and build a better future for all God's children. The prophecies we've explored today remind us that God's plan unfolds through human history in ways that often surprise and challenge us. Our role is not to predict or control these unfolding events, but to remain faithful to the calling of justice, mercy, and humility regardless of what the future holds. Whether the ancient prophecies about Persia and Israel find their ultimate fulfillment in our generation or in generations yet to come, our responsibility remains the same: to love our neighbors as ourselves, to seek justice for the oppressed, and to work for peace in a world torn by conflict and division. The Hebrew Israelite movement, with its emphasis on reclaimed identity and prophetic purpose, speaks to universal human needs for belonging, significance, and connection to something greater than ourselves. These needs transcend racial, ethnic, and cultural boundaries and unite us in our common humanity. Our individual stories, whatever our background or heritage, are threads in a tapestry woven by the hand of providence across millennia. We may not always understand the pattern, but we can trust that our lives have meaning and purpose within the larger design. As you continue your own journey of discovery, remember that the most important archaeological dig is the one you conduct in your own heart. The most significant genetic study is the one that reveals your connection to humanity. The most relevant prophecy is the one that calls you to be an agent of healing and hope in a broken world. What prophecy comes next? That depends in part on how we choose to live, how we treat one another, and how faithfully we respond to the calling to repair the world. The future is not predetermined, it's shaped by the choices we make today. Can you decode the signs of our times? The signs point not to division and conflict, but to the possibility of unity and peace. They point not to the triumph of one people over another, but to the recognition that we are all children of the same God, called to the same purpose of love. And the ancient seers who recorded these prophecies could never have imagined the technological tools we have today for understanding the past and shaping the. But they understood something that remains true across all generations. That ultimate meaning is found not in what divides us, but in what unites us in our common humanity and shared divine calling. So let us go forward with hope, with humility, and with a commitment to building bridges rather than walls, to seeking understanding rather than dominance, and to working for the day when the knowledge of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. The story continues, and you are part of it. Make it a story of hope, healing, and unity. Make it a story worthy of the ancient prophets who dreamed of a world where justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's our calling. That's our destiny. That's the prophecy we're all called to fulfill.